So we've covered off some performance measures and looking at those types of things. We've also covered off forecasting and trying to get a sense of where we're going in the future with that forecasting. Now we want to look at more of our supply chain and specifically how we might look at building or designing our supply chain network that works with our business, our small and medium business. And within that, that's where we're going to start to have a sense of what we might want to consider automating. When we look at our supply chain, the first thing that we probably want to look at is our options for competing. And we have a variety of different options. Michael Porter suggested effectively 3 different options. One, we could look at cost leadership. And in small business or medium business, that's usually not what we want to look at. 2, we could look at differentiating strategies, so offering higher quality. We could look at offering different products. We could be more responsive. We could offer better customer service to our customers. And those are the types of things that, as a small business, we probably want to look at. Alternatively, Michael Porter also identified the idea of a focused strategy. And this is also going to be attractive to some small businesses where we'll look at a particular niche, and in that focus strategy, we might even be able to compete on cost, but it's because we've nailed our market and our audience and our product and our delivery to that market and our audience very well that we're able to then really be the best source for that product. The issue or the challenge with a focus strategy is that typically we have a limit to where we can grow that business. So these are kind of the options for competing. I would strongly suggest not trying to compete on everything. Even if you look at something like a Walmart, when they're competing, arguably they're competing on price and they're competing on providing assortment and variety and being very responsive to their customers, but they're still not everything for everybody. And I'll tell you that Walmart's competing at a variety of levels, and they're doing it relatively successfully because of their heavy investment in information systems. So again, small and medium-sized businesses probably don't have the ability to put those kinds of capital into information systems, but if you look at a particular area that you want to compete with, or if you look at how you compete and you look at a particular area, that's maybe where you want to start looking at automating. Those are fairly high levels of how you can go about competing. When you start to talk about your specific business, we're really talking about the interactions of you as a person, your business, your product, and your customers. And keep in mind, when we talk about supply chain management, we're ultimately talking about the end consumer, but you also have to please your most immediate customer in that supply chain. So, what's going to help you define how you compete and who you are and so forth? One thing you want to look at is your product itself. How have you come up with your product? What is your product? Even the potential or the way that you go about manufacturing your product, that might in a sense be your product. If you have a foundry, the foundry itself is somewhat of your product and you're producing pieces for your customers, whatever they might be. Your product is going to dedicate or dictate that you're effectively trying to compete on a cost level if you're a foundry, as an example. Though there might be other ways of looking at it, as you may also compete on lead times, as that's an area of challenge that others or your customers that are buying from other foundries might have is the lead time. So in addition to your product, the customers you want to work with and the customers that are your ideal, kind of your A+ customers that you work with will also come into play here. What are they looking for? If you generally work with other businesses, they may be less interested in price and more interested in lead times. The house builder who's looking for cabinets, the cabinets being on time are going to be a significant component to them getting that house done on time, perhaps to a larger extent than specific price. You yourself are going to You yourself are going to care about what you want to do for your business. So who are you interested in working with? What products are you interested in as well? These are things that you want to consider as we're going through and looking at your supply chain and your business, and where can you automate? What is your ideal business? What do you ideally want to focus on given your core competencies? What are you very good at? If you're very good at working with your customers and listening to your customers and solving their problems, and it's not necessarily about the individual product that you're producing, you may consider outsourcing that product, or at least bringing in a significant level of automation to that product. However, if your product or if your ideal business and your business is about customizing things for your customer, then automating the production process might not be the way to go, but perhaps automating some sort of a sales process might be the way to go. So in looking at what you're going to automate, you want to look at your product, your customer, who you are as a person, why you're in business, what drives you, and then really look at your core competencies. What are you very good at? What do you want to continue focusing on? How does that become a core competency? And within all of that, what could you potentially automate? Now that you've looked at your core competencies, your product and your customer, and you understand what's important to your particular customer, how your product is offering that level of differentiation or cost savings or whatever the case might be, you want to look at different ways that you can then satisfy the customer and really get that product of yours to the customer. And that's really when we start talking about what are our options with supply chain networks. And really the first one would be direct to consumer. And this works well for very complex products. It often works well in a business to business kind of environment. And there's a variety of ways you want to consider doing this. One of the challenges with direct to consumer products, though, is that it can be very expensive to get your message out to all the consumers. So you also have to do a lot of the marketing and advertising yourself. An interesting example of direct to consumer that we haven't necessarily seen before is Tesla selling direct to the consumer. And we'll see if that continues to be the trend in automobile sales or not, but relatively complex product sold direct to the consumer is an interesting way of using supply chain. In addition to selling direct to the consumer, we can use intermediaries. And in small businesses, again, looking back at your core competency, this may make a lot of sense to use the intermediaries because they may already have those connections with potential customers that they can sell to. If you think to yourself of something like food production, for another example, if I'm producing a specialty teas, it would probably be that my core competency is in blending the particular ingredients in that tea and making the specialty tea. My core competency is probably not selling to purchasing agents at Sobeys or the different superstores and those types of things. So understanding your core competency, that's another example of why we want to truly understand that, so then we can focus on how do we design our supply chain to best let us take advantage of our core competency, but also get our product out to the right people and the most people that make sense. In addition to our intermediaries, we have different hub and spoke kinds of models. So similarly, we might either ship to a particular distribution center and that might go to other retailers from there. There could be additional players involved. So there could be wholesalers, there could be agents involved. There's a variety of ways that this can be handled. One of the things to note with different models or different networks within supply chain is that the more intermediaries that are involved, typically the more we're going to give up on margin, but we'll have a larger volume of people that eventually buying our product. So other things that you want to consider within designing your supply chain network are facilities as well. Now, that all said, the more facilities we have and the more steps that we go through in distributing our product, we're increasing the number of inventory that has to be in the supply chain overall. So there's a cost to that potentially. And if we have a product that could go obsolete, whether it's because of technology or whether it's a food product and it may just go obsolete because it goes bad, having more inventory out there could be disadvantage to us as well. So different things you want to consider. There's also transportation costs, all of those things. Consider again your product, your customer, what you want to be in the business of doing, what your core competencies are before you start completely finding a way or completely designing the supply chain network for you. Within that still comes back to helping you have a sense of where you want to automate. So if you're using intermediaries in your supply chain, you may want to automate the information sharing. You may want to automate things like your billing and your paying processes with them. Walmart provides a lot of information to their tier 1 suppliers as an example. That's a way you can automate, and it helps make those relationships work better. You may consider things like if you have a lot of suppliers that you count on, you may consider things like automating the information your suppliers are getting so that they can get orders of crucial parts to your business to you sooner. These are different things that you're going to consider. Your supply chain network that you're part of or that you've created will also be taken into consideration in these decisions and in what you may want to automate. As we wrap up this second video in our supply chain automation pilot program, we want to consider some of the key points to what was discussed. Throughout this, we talked about metrics and the importance of those metrics. One of the key points there, though, is that focus on the metrics that matter to you at this point and try to keep that to a minimal so that you actually do review and you focus on those metrics. Too much information can be as problematic as too little information, and more we see this to be true. In addition to looking at the metrics, we also talked about forecasting. The key point on the forecasting is that there's a variety of ways that you can go about forecasting, and I'd encourage you to bring in some of that external information into your forecasting, and I'd encourage you to try to do a bit more with the forecasting, though temper that with understanding the cost benefits of what you're getting out of that forecasting. If you're very dependent on inventory levels being correct and so forth and volatility, you might get more out of the inventory, out of the forecasting. If you're less dependent on that and in a more stable business, in a older or a more mature product life cycle, then forecasting might not be as important to you. Finally, one of the things that we talked about most recently was understanding your product and you and your customer, and how does that relate to defining the supply chain network that you're in, and where does that relate to the automation. These are all things that you want to really consider. There's a reality aspect to designing your supply chain, being in small and medium-sized business. And the reality is, you may not have started your business because Southern Alberta was the best place for you to be in business. You might have started your business because this is where you live and this is where you want to live. And so there's a reality component to all of these decisions, and you want to take that into consideration. Within that reality component, you want to take into consideration where you want to spend your time, what you enjoy the most out of your business, and where you can get the most and grow your business the most, and take those components and use those to help you guide your decision as to what you're going to invest in terms of automation in the supply chain. So next up, Jefferson Gardner with Enbridge is going to take you through much more detailed components of supply chain, the different areas of supply chain. He'll talk about emerging technologies and how they might apply, and that'll definitely come hand in hand with automation in the supply chain. He will then talk about integrating all of that within the supply chain and really trying to get you better information. From there, you'll come back and we'll have a couple more mini videos or one big session on creating your plan. So we'll finalize the decision that you've had. We'll do a full business case for that decision. We'll come up with a plan and funding sources for you to be able to invest in automation in your supply chain.